What's up guys, Frazier here for Complex News. Donald Trump talks a lot about his supposed record-setting first year, but unless you're counting days golfing or number of lies, basically the only record Donnie has set during his world-destroying first year has been in staff turnover. A mind-blowing 34% of White House staff has been fired, resigned, or rehired elsewhere. That's the highest first-year turnover rate in 40 years, twice as high as the runner-up. Out of all the people who have left the sinking ship of state over the past 365 days, like Michael Flynn, Sean Biggest Crowd Ever Spicer, Reince Priebus, or Sebastian I'm Not a Nazi Really Gorka, there were 5 who stood out as being among the worst of the worst. Here then are Trump's worst hiring decisions. Number 5. Taylor Weymouth. The Office of National Drug Control Policy is a pretty big deal. It makes sure that all of the government's anti-drug initiatives are working together, and it's also in charge of making sure that Trump's periodic moments of caring about the opioid epidemic translate into actual policy. So it was a huge deal when the Washington Post broke the story earlier this month that the ONDCP's Deputy Chief of Staff was Taylor Weymouth, a 24-year-old guy with no relevant experience, no interest in politics, and whose stepfather has a felony conspiracy conviction for processing illegal steroids. His only qualification? You guessed it, working on Trump's campaign. When all of this was exposed, Weymouth was, unsurprisingly, demoted. Number 4. Tom Price. Being in the president's cabinet is a pretty good job in theory. It's an unbeatable line on your resume above all else, and you're ensured a cozy and lucrative career afterwards. Somehow, that wasn't enough for Trump's Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. He needed to fly private too. Politico uncovered the fact that Price had spent over $400,000 of taxpayer money on private jets. Shortly after, it came out he'd spent another $500K on military flights. In the shadiest of shady ways to say, I'm sorry, Price reimbursed the government less than $52,000, an amount that he said would cover equivalent commercial tickets, but not anywhere close to the amount of dough that was actually spent. Price had no choice after the Politico story, but to fall on his sword. Number 3. Omarosa. While it's true that Trump's cabinet and judicial nominees, and hell, even his interns, are overwhelmingly white, his White House has been a home to incompetent folks of other races as well. Case in point, Omarosa. After appearing on 4 different Trump reality shows, it was only natural that the #1 villain of reality TV would move into the White House with the #1 villain of reality. There's only one problem. She didn't really have a job. Other than crowing about her boss having an enemies list and staging a White House wedding photo shoot, Omarosa, whose official title was Assistant to the President and Director of Communications for the Office of Public Liaison, didn't really seem to do much. So in December, she got on the bad side of new Chief of Staff John Kelly and resigned. As a final humiliation, she reportedly tried to sneak back into the White House, setting off alarms in the process. Number 2. Steve Bannon. The lesson to be learned from Steve Bannon's short run at the top of the mountain is, if you're gonna get a racist gas bag to help you make policy, at least make sure it's a loyal racist gas bag. Bannon managed to avoid the first 3 rounds of his boss's purges, but once the adult in the room, John Kelly, came on board of Chief of Staff, 2 shirts days were numbered. It took one interview where Bannon had a different position on North Korea other than whatever garbage Trump was spouting that day, and he was out. The coda came months later, when Sloppy Steve lost his other job after mouthing off about Trump's son to another reporter. Bannon lost his sugar mama, lost his gig at Breitbart, and will soon be reduced to booking gigs as a Bill Murray impersonator, or the Emperor from Star Wars. Number 1. Anthony Scaramucci. And at the top of our list, who could forget the Mooch? The financier, indie film producer, all-around loudmouth who for some reason follows me on Twitter, lasted only 10 days in his gig as communications director before being canned, but what a memorable week and a half it was. Remember when he quoted a cheesy pop song and said it was the work of Mark Twain? Or when he told a reporter that Steve Bannon was trying to do something that's anatomically impossible? There's one small consolation for a man who missed the birth of his own child in order to spend time with Donald Trump. He got to see himself played by Bill Hader on Saturday Night Live. For more about the next terrible decision Trump makes about staffing or anything else, subscribe to Complex on YouTube. For Complex News, I'm Frazier.